Welcome back. You're watching Political Exchange, where we continue our discussion with Dr. Iqbal Surve on the BRICS Business Council. Dr. Surve, a lot of attention in March when the BRICS member countries gathered on the idea of a BRICS Development Bank. Many people said that it was, either pie in the sky or that it is too ambitious a project. Others saying no, it's not an event, it's going to be a journey. If you compare the way in which other banks in other parts of the world, manage to get initiatives like this off the ground, it's going to take many, many years. To what extent was the idea of the BRICS Development Bank a centerpiece of discussion for the BRICS Council at this gathering?
I think it was a very important component. I wouldn't describe it as a centerpiece of the discussion. I think it's a given that we are all committed towards the establishment of the bank. As you correctly said, the nature of developing banks is that you have to be very cautious. You have to define its terms of reference very carefully, and we have to take into account that they exist currently in the African Development Bank, there's the World Bank, there's other multilateral banking institutions that operate. And so part of what the BRICS Bank would like to do is, of course, to work closely with those institutions and not necessarily compete with those institutions. However, we are saying that as Africans, as the BRICS countries, there's a unique development nexus in terms of the requirements, whether it is in healthcare, infrastructure, whether it is in the ICT economies of these countries. There's a requirement to finance these in a way which understands the development needs of the peoples of those countries, along with the capital needs of such projects. Sometimes those issues are not properly understood by banks that exist in, say, in the developed world. It's primarily because they're not operating in the BRICS countries themselves, that they don't see and understand. So the idea is, with the BRICS Bank, we'll be able to fund these expansion projects or capital projects because we understand the requirements and the context in which governments and people operate in those countries.
Now, of course, the large context at the moment is the world's ability and the global economy's ability to recover from what has happened and the shocks that has been delivered to the global economy. We see sluggish growth still coming out of China, the turnaround in the US not as fast as everybody would like it to be. So quite a what shall we say, cautiously optimistic or very cautious kind of turnaround. Many people are not quite sure what exactly it means. Given the kind of current global outlook, what is the appetite within the BRICS Business Council for risk, particularly as it relates to access to capital markets, and of course, the fact that many people are worried about what exactly the future trajectory looks like?
I don't think that there's a global view in terms of how we approach that, because the risk always has to be balanced against the growth. So if you take the growth component of that equation, unquestionably the growth exists in the BRICS countries, unquestionably, even with the slowing down in some of the BRICS countries, but in particular in Africa, where we are domiciled. There is tremendous growth, and some countries in Africa are experiencing growth in the double digits. Now, as a business person, investing on the continent, investing in the BRICS areas, you're always going to say, okay, what is the return going to be on the investment vis-a-vis the economic growth and the investment opportunity versus the risk? If we take that equation, we come to the, I would say, sort of scientific conclusion that the risk is much lower to invest in the BRICS countries than it is to invest in the developed countries, because there is zero growth, in fact, in some of the developed countries of the world.
But what about the inbuilt challenges in the developing world? Things like infrastructure. I mean, if you take a place like Nigeria, South Africa, power, electricity is critical to any kind of infrastructure rollout. In South Africa, power is incredibly expensive. In Nigeria, it's incredibly unreliable, for example. So they're built-in impediments, so to speak. How are these impediments addressed, Dr. Surve?
But it's precisely the aim of the BRICS Bank and precisely the aim of the BRICS Council to put in place the infrastructure that will overcome. So it's a chicken and egg situation,
Right.
isn't it? Historically, people always complained about Africa not having, and some of the other, India for example, not having the infrastructure to do the kind of things. Because, you know, even farmers, the rural farmers in the remote areas of our continent, they need better roads, they need better logistics, they need better markets to
Right.
to sell their products. Now, it's no good just saying that because it doesn't exist, you're not able to do it. So what we are trying to do with the formation of the BRICS Council is actually say, hold on, let's invest in infrastructure. Let's precisely, as the BRICS countries, let's put in place the power plants that you talk about. Let's put in place other energy sort of resource bases. Let's put in place roads, more roads, transport systems, water systems. So the kind of Africa and the kind of BRICS countries you will see over the next decade will be very, very different. In fact, part of the growth and the excitement of the opportunity in the BRICS countries is precisely because of these investments. However, the caution that we have is not so much whether we're going to do that. Of course we're going to do that. The caution we have is how do we do that in a collective manner where we share experiences across the BRICS countries. Some of the BRICS countries have been incredibly successful. China, for example, has been very, very successful in its infrastructure development program. Brazil has been very successful in its energy and resource efficiency programs. Russia has reindustrialized they had quite a big area in the aircraft industry, and they've gone back into that. So what is our challenge in all of this? Our key challenge is skills base. Our key challenge that we've identified is having the people to be able to carry out these kinds of projects or these kinds of business enterprises. And that, I must tell you, is one of the key priorities of the BRICS Council, is the exchange of a national skills base and programs, so that maybe we have engineers coming from some BRICS countries, training engineers from other BRICS countries. Maybe we have doctors from some BRICS countries, because there was a great project that was identified in Lesotho, a private public sector project in healthcare. And we're saying, you know, that kind of project can take place in other BRICS countries as well.
I'm quite interested in this debate around skills, because I've had it with various South African ministers, including the Minister for Economic Development, Ibrahim Patel, and he's got quite an interesting view on skills. He always says that we keep on saying South Africa doesn't have skills, but if you look, let's say, for example, at certain BMW plants in South Africa, we're rolling off this incredibly impressive car, and we are using South African labor. South African nurses are playing incredible roles in places like your Dubai's and Saudi Arabia's. South African skills, South African university educated people, South African engineers are building dams everywhere else. It's not like we don't have the skills. Our problem is massifying it, and of course skills retention. Do you share that view, Dr. Surve?
I do, to a lesser extent, not entirely.
You're not that optimistic?
No, I think one must always, no, I've never said that, by the way. I think one must always unpack what we're saying. Let's first start at the point where we're not saying this is about South Africa. This is about Africa. So when we talk about BRICS on the BRICS Business Council, and the reason why we had some people say 100 African billionaires there yesterday, I don't know, but it could be, was precisely because we're very serious about Africa as part of the BRICS thing. So when we talk about the skill set base, we should think about it in African terms, not in South African terms. In South African terms, I think we've got very specific skills and good skills in certain areas of the economy. However, in other areas of the economy, we may need a hell of a lot more skills.
Right.
And we need to develop those. And there are some industrialization projects where we don't have the skills, to be frank. There's a gap in terms of managerial. So we must also differentiate between technical skills and managerial skills, because sometimes you may have the technical skills, but you may not have the managerial skills to implement.
Well, certainly our project management leaves lots to be desired.
And there are lots of instances where I think we should learn from the challenges that we faced. So I think, but we're getting there. I think we're getting there. Part of what we should, however, do is identify very quickly which is the areas of excellence that we want to be in as South Africa, and also in other parts of the continent, and then make sure we have the necessary skills base for that.
Final question, Dr. Surve. Just take us through the sectors that have been identified as the most strategic and urgent for collaboration at this council meeting.
Well, there were many sectors that were identified, but none of which are more important than the other. That's the first point. And what was great about the summit was that there were breakaway sessions, and we had lots of the BRICS Council members from the BRICS countries, and of course lots of African delegates participating in those sessions. The session that I chaired in particular, which was ICT, healthcare and tourism, was a very dynamic one with lots of engagement from various people. So if you look at the sectors, manufacturing, it was one of the key sectors. I mentioned tourism, I mentioned healthcare.
Manufacturing Africa constantly falls down. I mean, everybody's saying, where's our Tata, where's the kind of industrial finished product, if you like, that Africa is going to be coming up with? Was there a sense of urgency around us having to get our manufacturing base into order?
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think there was a willingness from the BRICS countries to actually set up manufacturing bases in Africa itself. And there were lots of examples pointed out of that during the course of the summit. But it's a process. I mean, we don't necessarily just want to be in manufacturing. We may want to be in the sectors of ICT and innovation, in terms of e-commerce, e-government, e-health. Exactly. So, and I think we've got good universities in this country. We've got good tertiary institutions. We have to just jack up our education system a little bit more. So it's a question of where we want to be as Africans and where we have the expertise and the kind of value add we want to make. We cannot be everything to everyone. So we must choose the areas of excellence that we want to operate in.
And of course that allows for trade-offs to happen. Dr. Surve, thank you so much, of course, for your time.